Happy Book Talk Tuesday. So April is starts this week, and April is National Poetry Month. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of our poetry books and some books that maybe you hadn't thought about. So when I was growing up, I loved Dr. Seuss. My dad used to read Dr. Seuss to us, and I love Dr. Seuss. I love anything that rhymes. Rhyming was my thing. I also love music. And so when I read poetry or any novels in verse, there's a rhythm to it. And so it makes me happy. I love it. So The Sneetches is one of my favorite books from when I was a kid. The Sneetches, I just love the story of the Sneetches. I still love the story of the Sneetches. I've had this book since I was really, really young. I also like Horton. I think Horton the Elephant is if we all were just a little more like Horton all the time, could you imagine? He's just so kind. Horton is so kind. Okay, so I just love that. This is also one of my books from when I was a little girl, Where the Sidewalk Ends. I love Shel Silverstein. I love Shel Silverstein's poems. They're fun and they're silly. Some of them don't really make that much sense, and some of them do. This book has, it's even gotten wet, y'all. I don't do that to my books. I bet my brother borrowed this or something because I don't get my books wet. Anyway, I had to memorize a poem in sixth grade, or two poems. We had to memorize two poems and present them to class. And one of them was from this book, Sick, about little Peggy Ann McKay. She could not go to school today. She has the measles and the mumps, a gash, a rash, and purple bumps. Y'all, I remember that from sixth grade. I loved it. And then this one, A Light in the Attic, had bear in there. And I memorized bear in there because there was a polar bear in my Frigidaire. We liked it because it's cold in there. Anyway, they're just fun. They're fun poems. There's, poems about picking your nose. There's poems about, don't be dumb, that kind of stuff. Also, they're just silly. So I love it. This one is a newer one. This one it came out last year, and we actually got this in our Love Your Library at the end of last year or last spring, I think. So this is like poems for now, and the time we're living in. Tap Dancing on the Roof. This one is one that was a bluebonnet several years ago, but I still love it. It is Cijo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's Cijo Poems, and it's by Linda Sue Park, who writes some amazing novels. But this is a traditional Korean form of poetry. So it's kind of like haiku in that there's a certain number of syllables per line, but it's a little bit different. And she explains it at the beginning. So these are fun to read as well. Y'all, this book is old. It has been around for a long time. You can tell just by the cover and the barcode. It's really been around a long time. But it's poems that are in two voices. So you could grab a friend and read these poems together. So one person reads this side and then the other person reads over here. And if there are things on the same line, that means you would read them at the same time. And it sounds so cool when you're reading these together with someone. So Joyful Noise, it's old and it's been around a long time, but I still think it's so awesome. All right, Out of Wonder is a pretty new book. It just came out within the past few years, like maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But it is poems that are celebrating famous poets from all the way back to the 1600s. And it is Kwame Alexander is the one that kind of headed this up, and he's the one that wrote Crossover and Rebound and Booked. So this is, what they did is they have taken like famous people, famous poets, and they have, let me see, like this one is celebrating Langston Hughes. And so they write it, who wrote this one? Kwame Alexander. So he took one of Langston Hughes's poems and changed it a little bit to where it talks a little bit more about Langston Hughes or maybe a poem that he wrote that meant something to Kwame Alexander. So this one is super cool. And in the back, it tells you a little bit about all these poets. And I think that's just so neat. Like right here. There we go. So we've got Robert Frost, Chief Dan George, Nikki Giovanni, Terrence Hayes. Now, some of these people are still living today. And so you will still see poems coming out by a lot of these people. But this one is fantastic. And the artwork is amazing. The artwork is amazing if you can get your hands on it. We also have books that are written in verse, like Inside Out and Back Again. When you read these poems, they are written in verse. So it's a rhythm. It's a rhythm to the poem as you're reading it. And I love that. Same thing with the crossover that I just talked about by Kwame Alexander. His is a rhythm. So those of you that come in and say, when your teacher says you need a chapter book and you're like, it's too many words, it's too many pages. These books that are written in verse are not so bad because there's not as many words on the page. So it's really not so bad. This one, the last 5th grade class of Emerson Elementary, is about a group of 5th graders that are writing to try and save their school because they're wanting to tear the school down and build a grocery store in its place. And so they are using their voice through poetry to change people's minds. So I love it. Okay. And then the last thing I want to tell you, I've done at least one, I feel like I've done 2 Book Talk Tuesdays about novels in verse, like since I've been doing this. So if you go onto my YouTube channel, if you're interested in novels in verse, if you go on there to the YouTube channel, just read the titles and it'll be called Novels in Verse, and it'll give you lots more of these. But I love them, and they just keep coming out. So authors are really starting to write this way, and I just think that's fantastic. All right. Don't forget, I told y'all not too long ago about the Young American Poetry Digest. This is a contest for kids all across the United States, and you can get your work published in this Poetry Digest. You don't have to pay to get your work published. If you want to buy a book, you will have to pay to buy the book. They feature haiku poetry. And I think that is probably because they can fit a lot more haiku poetry than, page-long poetry. But they will take anything. But there are a lot of haiku poems in their books. We had 5 kids from our school last year that got into this one. The year before, we had 2 kids in the year before. This year, I think that the whole book should be Wilkerson kids, personally. And if you don't go to Wilkerson and you're watching this Book Talk Tuesday, it's okay. You can get your poem in there too. So you make sure that you go online and you submit your poems. You can submit as many as you want by April 24th. Go to youngpoets.org and submit all your poems. And then I cannot wait to see that you have gotten published in this digest. All right. I hope you saw some books that you want to pick up and read, and maybe it inspired you to start writing poetry yourself. You guys have a great day and go read lots of books.